Hello, welcome to handsonerp.com. This is Hassan Mir. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about learning and implementing roadmap for Oracle Payables. So these are the high-level steps that you need to go through in order to implement Oracle Payables. First, you need to create legal entities and operating units. These are the structures for managing data and segregating data from one group to the other. Once these structures have been created, we assign access on these structures to the users. Keep that in mind that you will be learning all these steps in detail in coming tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial is just to give you a high-level roadmap for both purposes, learning and for implementing. Okay. Now, once users have access to these structures, you're going to log in as a user and you're going to implement and you're going to configure financials and payables options. You can consider these financial and payable option screens as the main control panel to control all the configuration, the main configuration of Oracle Payables. Release 12, there are three screens for financials and payable options together. Now, once that is done, you're going to open your first period, and at this time you have a workable payables module available. Now, based on the user's requirements, you're going to configure more options, okay, optional options. Now, all the first four high-level steps are required in order to create a working AP instance. Most of these options cannot be changed later on, okay, so you need to really give these things a good thought before you can configure them. So you go through whole process of requirement gathering and proposing a solution, and then finally you configure these options after the approval from the client. After the first four options, after the first four high-level steps, you have a working payable module available. Now, after that, you can configure additional setup options to meet client's need, and all these options are optional. They're not one or two options, there are tons of options. Okay, not every client would be interested in these options. Only on need basis you should look into those options and ask client and give proposal to the client based on the requirement. Okay, now most of these options can be changed later on while the system is up and running. Okay, so they are not as critical. Of course, everything is critical, but even if you want to change them later on, you can. So all these options are not as critical as the first four options as we discussed earlier. Okay, so now let's talk about the learning roadmap. How are we going to learn the payables module? First, we're going to create a basic working AP module, and in order to do that, we need to go through all these steps. Okay, so we'll be talking about legal entities and operating units and granting access on these, and then setting up financial and payable options, and finally opening the first period, and then we have something that we can experiment with further. Once we have a AP module with us in which we can log in and do some work, then we're going to learn all features of payables one by one. Okay, so this is just for your learning approach. At the end, once we have learned in a step-by-step manner all the features available in Oracle Payables, then we will do a final recap of all the features available, and we'll propose a list of questions that you need to keep in mind while you're visiting your client. And with the help of these questions, you can do some requirement gathering from your client. Okay, of course, you can't just print out this list and give to your client as a questionnaire. It's not that hardcoded questionnaire as it sounds, but it's just list for you. Okay, as you can come up with your own methodology based on this list, because this list will give you all the questions that needs to be asked. Of course, if something is not relevant, then you won't be wasting your client's time. For example, if client doesn't use, for example, recurring invoices, then you won't be asking him about recurring invoices template, for example. Now, but this is list more for you than for the client. Okay, having said that, in the field you will perform complete requirement gathering first, and then you perform the setup, right? But while we are learning, we're going to do part of the setup first, and of course then we're going to learn more, and uh, in a step-by-step manner. So we have to change this approach a little bit. Let me go back. Okay, so while you're learning, you have to, first go through all the first four high-level steps in order to have a working AP module, and then you're gonna learn each and every feature of Payables one by one, okay, in a step-by-step manner. But when you're on the field, you first then you don't just follow the procedure the same way. You do complete requirement gathering um, at the first place, and once you have the whole requirement, then you do a complete setup. You just don't do first four steps first and then do more requirement gathering and then do the rest of the setup. You just do complete requirement gathering and then you do a whole setup. Okay, so things would change a little bit on the actual field. Now, this requirement gathering part, of course, could be done with the help of the list of questions that I'll provide once you are done with learning all the payable features, as we have talked about earlier. Okay. Now the second step, first you do the requirement gathering, and then you actually propose the setup, and on sign off you perform the actual setup. Okay, these two steps are very high level, uh, you know, steps for the whole project. Okay, take my tutorial on Oracle implementation project in order to learn more about the detailed steps on the project. But just to give you an idea, first you do the requirement gathering, and then you do the setup. Okay, you can't just open up the computer and start doing the setup for the client. And performing the setup step include all the steps that we have talked about. Okay, all those 5 steps, and you do the complete requirement gathering, and then you do the complete setup. You just don't do the first 4 steps and then do more requirement gathering. Of course, you can be more flexible on these the last box here, because these things can be changed later on as well. But you have to be each setup option should be as critical as the other. Okay, so you have to give importance to each setup option. So complete requirement gathering has to be done, and then complete setup has to be done. Okay, now I like to repeat this again and again, that as a consultant you have to learn 2 things. So while doing all these steps, you'll be learning 2 things. You'll be learning all those tasks that users perform, okay, and you will also be learning all those tasks that consultants perform as called setup task. Why do you learn the tasks that users perform? For a couple of reasons. You need to train users, you need to troubleshoot their problems, okay, and of course when you're doing the setup task, you need to know how it would impact each setup option, how that would impact the end user screens. Okay, so you have burden on you that you have to learn both the things. Okay, so you learn, of course, end user tasks to an extent where you can help end users and where you can troubleshoot their problems, but of course you don't become an accountant. Okay, because you need to know how to enter journals, for example, and you need to know how to post journals. But what journal needs to be entered remains the duty of the end user, because he is the main accountant, not you. But as a consultant, you need to know how to enter journals, and of course you need to have an accounting knowledge of debit, credit, etc., etc. So just keep those things in mind. And having said that, it's important to know the high-level learning roadmap, so that once you are learning payables, you should know where that each of those steps stand in the big picture. Okay, so that's it, and in coming tutorials we'll be implementing Oracle Payables. I'll see you in the next tutorial.